Wing and former Obama campaign manager David Plouffe. David's newest season podcast, Campaign HQ, premieres today with the first episode focused on the Senate race in Pennsylvania, which really is one of the fascinating ones. But David, I must say, I've just been absolutely I've been mesmerized by the changes, the cross currents in American politics right now in a year that should be a runaway victory for Republicans. It's not turning out that way, is it?
Well, it doesn't look like that, Joe. Yeah, I think this is one of the more complex elections, really, in a couple of generations. I mean, 1998, as you well know, was complicated because of impeachment, 2002 in the aftermath of 9/11. But this one, I think, even more so. I still think that, Republicans probably have a natural edge. Democrats are the party in power. You've got an economy that I think voters think is slightly improving, but still challenging. But Republicans are a very damaged brand. Some of their candidates even more so in some of these key states. Obviously, the abortion issue is really driving both vote share and turnout. So I think we're going to be all of us should be careful about predictions until we start seeing votes counted. But yeah, I think Democrats have the best playing field they could have possibly imagined, let's say 6-9 months ago. This close to the election, again, let's remember, people are going to start voting very, very soon in a lot of states.
And let's talk about the abortion issue. You know, I said a couple of days before the election in 2020, I didn't trust polls when I was running for office. And I didn't trust the polls that were showing Joe Biden up by like 14 points in Wisconsin. And it seems that a lot of the state polls, especially in the Midwest, have not been very accurate over the past couple of cycles. And they've mostly broken Republicans' way. Kansas was different. That was supposed to be a 1, 2, 3 point victory for the pro-life side. Instead, a massive victory for the pro-choice side. I'm curious. Do you think we may see that nationwide? Does the Dobbs decision completely change how we look at the turnout in this election?
It could. Now, that was a race about one issue, abortion. So clearly, to the extent that a lot of these Senate races, these big governor's races, even some of the House races, maybe they're not going to be seen to that same extent, but abortion is the primary issue or top two. It could. Why would that happen? Well, it may be that polls are showing, let's say, suburban women voters, or even some exurban women voters, ultimately choose Democrats much more so than a poll would capture, or that a pollster would believe could happen. Maybe turnout is really is disruptive, meaning Democratic turnout is that much stronger than Republican turnout. And how do you get landslides? You get landslides in two ways. One is one party has a huge turnout advantage over the other. The second is that swing voters lean dramatically in one direction. And then even some soft supporters of a party move in that election. And I think we'll see some of those voters in this election. Now, I will caution on the polls, Joe. Most of these polls right now around the country show Democrats doing very well. But a reminder, one, polls have been wrong a lot. And two, if someone's leading a race 48-42, that's not 100% of the vote. And I think a lot of the voters right now that are saying they're undecided or they don't choose a candidate, most of those are going to come home to the Republicans. So I think a lot of these races will close. But there's no question Democrats right now in many states, if you believe these polls that are all accurate, are close to or sitting at their win number. And that's certainly where you'd like to be heading into the middle of September.
Yeah, and Willie, obviously, so many people go home. They come home at the end. That's like when Joe Biden's sitting at 32, 33, 35% in polls. A lot of those are just Democrats that want him to be more progressive or don't like something that he did. They usually come home. It happens on the Republican side as well. And you look at all of these polls, and at the end of the day, like, for instance, in Arizona, we saw that Senator Kelly was supposed to be 13, 14 points ahead of Martha McSally. That ended up being a nail biter at the end. Chances are good that's how most of these close races are going to end in swing states, too.
Yeah, even with some of these extreme candidates in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, you go down the list to Arizona as well. The races are tight, and David knows that as well as anyone. It may feel like momentum at the moment, but there's a long way to go. David, I'm curious what you make of the president's argument out of the campaign trail. He's been in Wisconsin. He's been in Pennsylvania, talking about democracy as sort of a fundamental question, that's on the ballot, and that some of these candidates that are running on the Republican side this time around are so extreme that the country might be unrecognizable unrecognizable if they do win. Is that compelling to voters? It doesn't get down on the ground with them and talk about inflation and gas prices and all those things. But is that idea that, hey, these people are too crazy to run the country, is that compelling to voters?
Well, Willie, I'd say it happens to be true. And there are moments in our history where you've got to meet the moment. So democracy is very much at risk. You have people all across the country, including, importantly, people who are campaigning to be Secretary of State to run their elections, saying Biden didn't win, and basically I'm going to run the elections and I'll decide who wins. So if we call that out, if we don't call that out, we're kind of surrendering, no matter what the polling says in terms of its import. So I know that can seem quaint, but I think it's pretty important. I think if we're a democracy in January 21st, 2025, maybe we will have made it through the other side. But that's very much in question. I do think from an election standpoint, you're trying to build a coalition here of any Republican, Democrat, and Independent who may disagree on tax rates, who may disagree on how we fund health care, who may disagree on climate change, but say for this moment, we need to come together and stop the threat. So I think the politics of it can be effective. But more importantly than that, I think particularly the president of the United States and anybody with a microphone has to continually call this out, because it's not a game. We are all throughout the country, people running for Senate, governor, Secretary of State, House, who basically are saying, I will decide who wins elections, not the voters. And it's a really scary time in American history.
David, let's talk about instinct rather than polls, your instinct. And the abortion decision to many people means something that they were used to was taken away by politics, by government, by the court. Never a good thing in people's minds. They're used to something and suddenly it's withdrawn from them. But there's one political party more largely involved in that, obviously, than another political party, the Republican Party. So my question to you is, the level of cruelty involved in many Republican policies, child tax credits, no, all sorts of things, no, the negative. Is the level of cruelty in Republican politics, is that an untapped resource for Democrats?
It's really interesting, Mike. It might be. I mean, it's kind of tailor-made for the debate stage. You probably remember some of the amazing George Carlin bits about this, where you can turn this, which is, to a Republican candidate. Listen, you're wrong, I think. You want to criminalize doctors. You want to criminalize women. You want to outlaw abortion. And by the way, even in states that haven't done that, Republicans have been pretty clear if they get power, they're going to introduce legislation to do that. But then let's talk about what you do when children are born. And yes, then I think you can go through a really searing indictment and a hypocritical indictment of that. So I think so. And the cruelty is kind of the point. And that's what drives so much of Republican primary politics today. And until that changes, I think the country remains at risk. And that's when I will feel a little more at peace, is when on scale, you see more Republican candidates get through primaries who aren't election deniers, who aren't so hateful, who aren't so conspiracy theory driven. Kind of the good old days, as Joe remember, where Republicans who believed in lower taxes, stronger defense, the things that were all in core to their message, could actually win primaries.
Yeah, those days apparently gone. David Plouffe, thank you so much. The newest season of your podcast, Campaign HQ, premieres today, and certainly look forward to that. Thanks so much for being with us. We love having you on.